So hello and welcome to this video on the AJH Synth Wave Swarm, dual 6-stage wave animators. Before we get into what this is and what the functions are, let's check out what's to come later in the video. So the wave swarm, as it says, is a dual 6-stage wave animator. And what this means is we can take an input into A, we can pass through the dry signal for A, we can actually drive and soft clip this, rounding off triangles to kind of clipped sines and bringing in some of those square-like harmonics. Then we get 6 animated versions of this wave and it tracks the input. So a typical use would be to put a saw wave in and create that Roland JP super saw type sound. We'll start with a triangle, so let's patch it up and see what this thing does. Now at lower input levels, or rather lower dry levels, we get an accurate pass through of the wave, but as I push it, and this LED shows us the onset of soft clipping, you can see it rounds off. It's more sine-like, but then when it's pushed even further, we get these nice square-like overtones. Leaving this at a low level, this is what the wave animation's actually doing. And each of these 6 animators runs at a different rate. It's like a PWM effect. But looking at the scope, it's almost kind of like the shapes that a wavefold would give you as well. So by mixing these, we can clip it, it sounds great. We get that big stacked detuned oscillator sound. Now typically this would be done on saw waves. So let's swap out the input for a saw. Now my saw's a little lower level. Again, clipping it is nice. Kind of rounds out that fundamental. And you can balance these to get more or less of that phase cancellation tremolo-like effect. Turning them all up, going to be really full on, but that's not for everything. You can see there with an interesting kind of more pyramid stacked pulse like wave. Now leaving that as is, let's set up a sound on B. So into B and out of B. And if I now come out of A plus B and go into A, we've got 12-stage animation, because input A will go to both ends, all 12 stages of animation, and they're all slightly different. It's not 6 of exactly the same rate will come out of A plus B. We could of course go stereo, into A and into B as hard left and right, out of A and out of B as hard left and right. So let's patch that up and make up a stereo patch. Okay, so here we've got 2 waves patched into the in A and B. Now these are tuned a fifth apart. One is a triangle, one's a kind of wave-shaped sine, and we're coming out of A and B, and these are hard left and right, going into a low-pass gate. Now let's open up the low-pass gate fully. I'm going to add some dry level to each. So of course you'll need headphones or stereo speakers for this, because it's hard left and right, as I said. Now clipping these, sounds great. Let's add some animation. I'm going to close my low pass gates and then strike my low pass gates, the left one and the right one, with different rhythms. I'm also going to add some LFOs independently to each side of the channels, each left and right low pass gate. So they're now being plucked and struck, and they have these LFOs opening them. So in this patch, I wanted to look at using the wave swarm over more complex waves. Now there's some effects and drums that are sounding great if I do say so myself, so let's just take a quick listen. Now let's lose the effects and the drums. This is the sound from wave swarm. Now let's lose my modulation and pitch sequencing and check out what's going on. So first, let's take a listen to the V scale. This is a sine wave coming in. I'm going to open up this sound using the shaping to go way beyond what is a sine wave. And let's start to modulate the V shape so we can hear what's going into the wave swarm. Rising up and down, it's pinching in and out. It's a much more complex wave, and we've got a demo of the V shape coming in the near future. Now that's going into the wave swarm. Using the A and B out, I'm getting 12 stages of animation, and that's the blue trace on data. So big rich wave, far from the sine wave which is coming into the V scale, then V scale to wave swarm. Now this is simply going into a low pass gate that's been opened by an envelope. I have a Finaliser R-EQ, the AJH EQ and effect module, which is being chopped in and out with an envelope and VCA. And some drums. Let's get this sequence back in to the oscillator. And that's the patch, the wave swarm animating already rich, modulated, wave-shaped waves. So continuing to look at processing more complex waves, here is a slowly modulating wavetable. This is the top trace on data, and we're currently listening to it totally dry before it even hits the wave swarm. So let's just get used to this moving wavetable for a second. You can hear and see there's a lot of harmonics that are moving around. Now let's take that over to the wave swarm. Coming into A and I'm coming out of A. Let's turn everything down. First of all, we can clip that dry, which kind of rounds off the kind of harshness in the wavetable. As I back it off, quieter, but there's spikier kind of harmonics are more present. Rounding it off actually gives us a stronger, deeper root fundamental from the wave. Now animating this, probably a little fast. Let's start with the slower ones. Very kind of glitchy. There's a lot, I mean you can see on that wave and hear it, there's a lot for it to kind of chew on and try to track here. Got a little bit of animation and some clipping, and with this gorgeous shifting tone. Now because input A will pass to B, and we could process it as all 12 stages as we've seen earlier in the video by coming out of A plus B with just one input, Let's come out of B independently and get kind of dual mono 2-layer sound going on. So turning off this sound for a second, I'm going to patch output B into a low pass gate and turn that up. Let's just get some dry sound in. Now I'm not actually going to animate B, but we've still got some shaping kind of bleeding through and some of that dry clipping. Okay, I like that. Let's actually animate it. So this is now just output B. Most of the animators down, just one stage of animation and a little bit of clipping going on. Just going to close off this low pass gate a bit. Now that can be a more simple layer, but an interesting way to use both outputs. And this being modular, we can process them however we want. I have output A now going through a different low pass gate. And this just has an LFO control in it. Let's go for some more extreme animation, and we'll use the B side as this static pulse, our main rhythm, our main thing that's going on. And we'll use, let's get rid of the dry, we'll use the animated version out of A, just to bring in these kind of sonic washes over the top. I'm going to turn it down a bit on my mixer first. And let's get that wash of sound through a reverb, and we'll use the AJH Finaliser R-EQ to do that. So we're starting to build up an interesting sound layer from a single, quite complex input, dry, minimally animated pulse, just kind of pinning this down through a low pass gate, and then these washes into some effects. Now, of course, you could swap out these rhythms or LFO modulations for whatever you want, but it's an interesting way to stack these sounds. So let's check out the waveform with some drums. Now, I wouldn't say this is where it excels, but we can do some interesting things by driving the signal and treating it as a nice distortion for electronic drums. But the module's made to process kind of constant sources like oscillator waves, and that's really where it shines. But let's just listen to some of the drums. I've got some acoustic sounds, some electronic, they're all just random loops from Logic. And all these drums have just been dry. Let's flick over to the version coming out of Waveswarm. And you can't really wave animate a transient. It just kind of cuts in and out, because that's what the circuit does. So as a mega trashy module, that may be useful. But let's listen to it really driving that trap-like beat. It really does work well on that low end in that trap-like beat. Now we could double up the distortion by patching the output of A into the input of B and coming out of B. So let's try that. Now, it doesn't sound great over the whole thing, but it works really nicely on that low end. But I just wanted to show you that it's not really for drums. It's more of a specialist, trashy, mad effect over more transient, rich drum patterns. So I turn the Waveswarm into a clock that's then making all my drum patterns. So let's mute the drums. Bit of a weird use, but an interesting one. This is what's actually coming out of the Waveswarm. Now it's because I've patched feedback that the internal LFOs modulating these animation stages are creating little thumps, sub-audio clicks, and that's this waveform. Output B is going to a clock multiplier and divider. Output A is what we're actually listening to. Output A plus B, sorry, this is that orange cable going into data. And out A is going into B. So I've got feedback going on, and that's why we're getting this little click. That sounds like interference and low-end thumping. Quite interesting to offset the beat, but that going into a divider and multiplier has meant I can build up a beat, triggering some other drum sounds. But this is just one stage. If I add another, it's going to trip up this dividing and multiplying because we're going to get different rhythms. So let's listen to the output again. And it's really tripping that multiplier up. We're getting audio rate, ratchets and bursts. Much nicer with just one of them. So that's the waveform as a wonky clock and interference noise generator by feeding output A back into B, clocking dividers and multipliers to make beats with one output, and actually listening to the weird sound the feedback makes on its own. So to finish on, let's bathe in some Finaliser R-EQ stereo verb and stereo waveswarm action. Now let's take a listen for a minute and then I'll break down the patch. So this patch is these two Danny sound oscillators. One of them has Vot/Proctive movement, one of them doesn't, one of them's static. So if I put those back on my mixer and turn the reverb off, these are hard left and right, so go get some headphones or decent speakers if you haven't already. Let's turn the animation down. So you can hear the kind of clean and clear sound. I'm going to animate these. Turn up my reverb. This is stereo in, stereo out on the verb. So that's true stereo, in A, out of A, in B, out of B. But we can also make use of this A-B input. So I've patched this back into this Geranalog filter 8. This is being modulated by a LFO that's just out of sight, but simple LFO, you'll hear it's just a triangle wave. And I'm also doing some linear FM over the filter cutoff from one of these oscillators. So it's going to swell in this filtering, and it's a bandpass. So let's take a listen to that. That's going through some reverb as well. So without A and B hard left and right in stereo, plus the A plus B going through the filter for some band passing, got a nice wide stereo image, but also lots of crossover because that left and right, one wave droning, one being pitch modulated, is coming together in the reverb, and the A plus B through the filter is also bringing them together. So it's a big wide image, but it's very unified. It's not completely hard left and right. So that's it for this video on the AJH Synth Mega Swarm. It can take one oscillator and make it sound like 6 or 12. It can take 2 and make them sound like 12 through this dual 6 stage. There's a lot that you can get out of it. Great fun module, sounds rich, deep, fat, pulsing, detuned, unison making thing. Great quality as you'd expect from AJH Synth. Hit like, subscribe, comment, go support me on Patreon if you'd like extra content. Leave a comment if you've any questions. Cheers for watching.